It was another hot afternoon in the small town where the air smelled of dust and smoke from nearby food stalls. In one corner of that town, beyond the paved streets and shiny shops, stood a neighborhood that time had almost forgotten. The houses were made of old wood, the walls cracked and the roofs covered with rusted tin sheets. When it rained, the drops would fall straight through the ceiling and into metal pots placed on the floor. That was the home of a 12-year-old girl named Lena. Lena lived with her grandmother in a tiny one-room house that stood near the edge of the town. Her grandmother, old and fragile, had raised her since she was a baby. Life had never been kind to them, but the old woman always said, "We may not have much, but we have each other, and that's enough." Lena believed her. Every morning, she would wake up before the sun, sweep the small yard, heat a pot of water, and help her grandmother pack fruits into a basket. They sold those fruits by the roadside near the market. It was the only way they earned enough to eat each day. Lena didn't complain about their life. Even when her stomach growled from hunger or her shoes tore apart at the soles, she smiled. She had a simple dream: to study, to learn, and maybe one day to give her grandmother a better home where rain didn't leak through the roof. She never said it out loud, but she thought about it every night before she went to sleep. That morning, the sky was clear and blue, and the town was already alive with the sound of vendors calling out their prices. Lena sat on a wooden crate by their small fruit stand, carefully arranging mangoes and bananas in neat rows. Her grandmother sat beside her, fanning herself with an old newspaper. Business was slow. Most people walked past them, heading for the bigger stalls inside the market. Some didn't even look their way, but Lena never lost her smile. She greeted everyone with a soft, "Good morning," even if they ignored her. After a few hours, her grandmother told her to go home early. The heat was too much, and she wanted Lena to rest before school the next day. Lena packed the remaining fruits, kissed her grandmother on the cheek, and began her walk home. She always took the long path, passing by the big road that led into the wealthier part of town. The road was cleaner there, and sometimes she liked to imagine what life would be like if she lived in one of those houses with shiny windows and gardens full of flowers. That afternoon, a black car drove past her and stopped near the bridge that crossed the river. It was the kind of car she had only seen in magazines, polished, expensive, and silent, even as it rolled to a stop. A man stepped out, tall and well-dressed, wearing a dark suit despite the heat. He looked out toward the water for a while, holding his phone to his ear. Then he got back into the car. Lena noticed because people nearby began whispering. Someone said it was a businessman who had moved into the city recently, a millionaire who owned half the land near the market. To Lena, it didn't mean much. She kept walking, her bare feet brushing against the dry road. By the time she reached the bridge, dark clouds were forming above. The air grew heavy, and thunder rumbled in the distance. She started walking faster, clutching her small bag to her chest. Rain began to fall, slow at first, then all at once. Within minutes, the road turned slippery and water rushed along the edges. Lena ran toward the bridge, hoping to stand under it until the rain slowed down. The wind howled, and lightning flashed across the sky. As she reached the middle of the bridge, she thought she heard something, a faint cry for help carried by the wind. She stopped. The sound came again, louder this time. She looked down toward the river, and her heart jumped. The black car she had seen earlier was half sunk in the muddy water below. The engine still hummed faintly, but the man inside wasn't moving. Panic gripped her chest. She looked around, shouting for help, but the rain drowned out her voice. The road was empty. Everyone had run for shelter. Lena didn't think twice. She dropped her bag on the ground, kicked off her torn shoes, and climbed down the steep embankment. The mud was thick and slippery. She fell twice, scraping her knee, but she kept going. When she reached the water's edge, she saw the man's hand pressed weakly against the window. Without another thought, she jumped into the cold, fast-moving river. The current pulled her sideways, and she gasped as muddy water filled her mouth. But she fought hard, kicking and pushing until she reached the car door. She tried pulling it open, but it wouldn't budge. The man inside was unconscious. Her arms shook from exhaustion. She screamed again, hoping someone would hear. No one came. Taking a deep breath, she dove under the water and yanked at the door handle with all her strength. This time it opened slightly. She reached in and grabbed the man's arm, pulling with every bit of strength her small body had. It took several tries, but she finally managed to drag him out. The man was heavy. His head fell back as she tried to pull him to the bank. Her arms burned, her legs trembled, but she didn't stop. Inch by inch, she dragged him onto the muddy shore, coughing and gasping for air. When they finally reached dry ground, she checked if he was breathing. His chest moved faintly, but his lips were pale. She pressed her hands against his chest, the way she had once seen on television, and prayed he would wake up. After a few seconds, the man coughed and water spilled from his mouth. He was alive. Lena sat beside him, shaking from cold and fear. Her clothes clung to her skin, and her hands were covered in mud. She looked around again, hoping someone had seen them. In the distance, she finally noticed a few people gathering near the bridge, pointing and shouting. An older man ran down to help, followed by two others. They lifted the millionaire and carried him toward the road. Someone called an ambulance. When they saw Lena standing there, dripping wet and trembling, one of the men frowned. "Who's this girl?" he asked. Another man replied, "She was the one in the water." But before Lena could say anything, one of them noticed something shiny on the ground. It was a gold watch half buried in the mud. The man picked it up, held it up to the light, and frowned again. "This looks expensive," he said. Then he turned to Lena. "Was this with you?" Lena shook her head, but her voice was too soft to hear. The man's tone grew harsher. "Did you take this from him?" he asked. "You were in the water, maybe you tried to steal it." Lena's eyes widened. "No, sir, I didn't." But the man interrupted, calling to the others. "Check her pockets. Poor kids like this, they'll do anything." The words hit her like a slap. She stepped back, shaking her head. "I didn't take anything. I just wanted to help him." But no one listened. The ambulance arrived just then, and the paramedics focused on the injured man. In all the confusion, Lena stood alone, clutching her wet shirt, tears mixing with the rain. The man who had accused her handed the watch to a police officer who had come to the scene. "She was found near it," he said. The officer looked at Lena, then down at her muddy clothes, and sighed. "We'll sort this out," he said coldly. "Come with me." Lena tried to explain, but her voice was lost in the noise of sirens and rain. She watched as the ambulance doors closed on the man she had just saved. Then the police led her to their car. People standing nearby whispered and stared. Some shook their heads. No one defended her. No one said she was the reason that man was still alive. They only saw a poor, soaked girl beside a rich man's broken car and assumed the worst. As the police car drove away, Lena pressed her forehead against the cold window. Her body hurt from the rescue, but her heart hurt even more. She didn't understand why helping someone could lead to this. She had done the right thing, but instead of thanks, she was treated like a thief. Back at the bridge, the rain began to fade, and the muddy water started to calm. The people slowly left, talking about what had happened. No one knew that the man who had been rescued was still alive because of that little girl's courage. No one knew that the watch they thought she had stolen wasn't even missing. It was still inside the car, wedged between the seat and the console. But by the time they would find that out, it would already be too late to undo the pain in Lena's heart. That night, in a cold cell at the small police station, Lena sat quietly, hugging her knees. She thought about her grandmother waiting for her at home, wondering why she hadn't come back. She thought about the man she saved, hoping he was alive, and as tears filled her eyes, she whispered to herself, "Maybe kindness isn't enough for people to see the truth." She didn't know it yet, but the next day would change everything. The night passed slowly. Inside the small police station, the walls were cracked, and the only sound was the buzzing of a weak light bulb. Lena sat on a wooden bench, her wet clothes now dry but stained with dirt. She hadn't eaten all day, and her stomach hurt. Her hands were still red from the cold water, and her eyes burned from crying. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the man's face, unconscious, pale, and still in the river. She remembered the weight of his body and the fear she felt when the water almost pulled her down. She didn't regret saving him. What hurt most was how quickly people turned against her. They didn't even ask what happened. They just looked at her torn clothes, her muddy face, and decided she was a thief. A young officer sat at a desk near her, writing something in a big book. He didn't look mean, but he didn't look kind either. "You'll stay here until morning," he said without looking up. "The man you pulled out is still in the hospital. When he wakes up, we'll know what really happened." Lena nodded silently. She wanted to tell him she didn't take anything, but she had already said that many times. No one had listened. Her grandmother's face kept flashing in her mind. She must be worried sick by now. She probably thought Lena got lost in the rain or worse. By morning, the small room smelled of old paper and damp air. The officer brought her a piece of bread and a cup of water. She said thank you softly and ate it in silence. A little later, another officer came in and said the man from the car was alive but still too weak to talk. "Good," Lena whispered. "He's alive." She smiled for a second, but then remembered that he still didn't know what had happened, that everyone thought she had stolen from him. By noon, her grandmother arrived at the station, crying and shaking. She rushed to Lena and hugged her tightly.
"My child, are you all right?"
"What did they do to you?" she asked between sobs. Lena could barely speak. The old woman turned to the officer and pleaded, "Please, sir, she would never steal. She's a good girl. She saved that man. Why would she take anything?" The officer sighed. "Ma'am, we're just following procedure. The man's watch was found near her. Once he wakes up, we'll clear everything." Her grandmother looked at him with tired eyes. "She saved his life," she said softly. "And this is her reward?" The officer looked down but said nothing. He left the room, leaving the two of them together. Lena held her grandmother's wrinkled hand and whispered, "I didn't do anything wrong. I promise." Her grandmother nodded. "I know, my dear. The truth always comes out. You just have to be patient." Later that day, the rain returned, tapping softly on the windows. Lena sat by the small barred window, staring outside at the gray sky. Somewhere in that same town, the man she had saved was lying in a hospital bed. She didn't know his name or what kind of life he had, but she hoped he remembered her face. She hoped he would tell them the truth. At the hospital, the man slowly opened his eyes. His body ached, and for a moment he couldn't remember what had happened. The nurse explained that his car had slipped off the road into the river during the storm. "You're very lucky, sir," she said kindly. "If it weren't for that little girl, you might not be here." He blinked, confused. "Little girl?" "Yes," the nurse said with a smile. "A young girl from the neighborhood jumped into the water and pulled you out before anyone else came. She's the reason you're alive." The man frowned. "Where is she?" "I need to see her." The nurse's smile faded. "She's at the police station." He looked shocked. "At the station? Why?" "Some people said she tried to steal from you. They found your watch near her," the nurse explained quietly. "But the police said it's just an investigation. They're waiting for you to wake up." The man's face grew pale. He asked for his clothes immediately. He didn't care about the pain in his ribs or the bandage on his arm. He wanted to go to that girl. A few hours later, a black car pulled up in front of the small police station. Everyone inside turned to look. The same man who had almost drowned walked in, his coat draped over his shoulders, his step slow but steady. The officer at the desk stood up quickly. "Sir, you should be resting," he said. "I'll rest later," the man replied calmly. "Where's the girl who saved me?" They led him to the back room where Lena and her grandmother sat. When Lena saw him, she froze. He looked different, clean, tall, with kind eyes, but she recognized him instantly. The man stepped closer. "You're the one who pulled me out of the river, aren't you?" he asked gently. Lena nodded nervously. Her grandmother held her hand tighter. "Yes, sir," Lena said softly. "I saw your car and jumped in. I didn't want you to die." The man's voice shook. "You risked your life for me." She looked down. "Anyone would have done it." He shook his head. "No, not everyone would." The room was quiet for a moment. Then the officer cleared his throat and said, "Sir, there's also the matter of your missing watch. It was found near—" But before he could finish, the man reached into his coat pocket and pulled something out. It was the same gold watch. "You mean this one?" he said calmly. The officer's eyes widened. That's the same one?" The man nodded. "It never left me. It must have slipped off and fallen under the seat." I found it this morning when I asked my driver to check the car. He turned toward Lena. She didn't steal anything. She saved me. The silence that followed was heavy. The officer lowered his head. I'm very sorry, sir. We just followed procedure. Lena's grandmother stood up, tears in her eyes. Procedure? She whispered. Do you know what that word did to a child's heart? Lena didn't say anything. She just looked at the man, unsure if she should cry or smile. He walked closer and knelt down so their eyes were level. I owe you my life, he said softly. And I'm sorry you had to suffer because of people's doubts. You did something brave and the world didn't see it, but I did. Tears rolled down Lena's cheeks. She tried to wipe them away, embarrassed. The man stood up and turned to the officers. I want her released immediately, he said firmly. And I'll take her home myself. The officers nodded quickly, not daring to argue. Within minutes, Lena and her grandmother stepped out into the cool evening air. The rain had stopped and the ground was wet and shining under the streetlights. The man opened the car door for them. Lena hesitated for a moment, still unsure if all this was real. But her grandmother gently pushed her forward. It's all right, dear, she whispered. The car ride was quiet. Lena looked out the window, watching the lights pass by. The man glanced at her through the mirror once or twice, but she didn't notice. She was lost in thought. When they reached their small house, she was embarrassed to let him see it. The walls were cracked and the roof looked weak. The man stepped out anyway. This is where you live? He asked gently. Lena nodded. It's not much, but it's home, she said with a small smile. Her grandmother invited him inside. He looked around at the tiny space, the single bed, the small stove, the few dishes on a wooden shelf. It was clean, though worn. He turned to Lena. You've been helping your grandmother take care of this place, haven't you? She nodded again. I help her sell fruit. Sometimes I study when there's light. He was quiet for a moment, taking it all in. Then he said softly, You did something that no one else dared to do. You saved a stranger without thinking about yourself. That says a lot about who you are. Lena didn't know what to say. No one had ever spoken to her like that before. Most people only saw her as a poor kid from the wrong side of town. Before leaving, the man turned to her grandmother and said, You raised her well. I'll make sure she never has to go through this again. He didn't explain what he meant, but his words carried weight. He looked at Lena one last time and said quietly, Rest now. Tomorrow will be better. When the car drove away, Lena stood at the doorway, the sound of the engine fading into the distance. For the first time in days, she felt her heart lighten. Maybe the world wasn't as cruel as it seemed. Maybe kindness still mattered. That night, as she lay beside her grandmother, she whispered, He believed me, Grandma. He really did. Her grandmother smiled and stroked her hair. I told you, my dear. The truth always finds its way out. And though Lena didn't know what the next day would bring, she felt something new stirring inside her. Hope. The next morning, the sun rose slowly over the quiet town. The streets were still wet from the night rain, and birds hopped along the fences searching for crumbs. Inside the small wooden house near the edge of town, Lena sat by the doorway holding a small cup of tea her grandmother had made. It wasn't sweet, but it was warm, and that was enough. She hadn't slept much the night before. Her mind kept replaying everything that had happened. The river, the cold water, the police, and the kind man who finally believed her. She still couldn't believe it was over. The fear that had lived in her heart for the past day was gone, replaced by something she hadn't felt in a long time, peace. Her grandmother moved slowly around the small room, humming softly as she folded a few pieces of clean cloth. She smiled at Lena and said, You see, my child? The truth always comes out. That man saw your heart, not your clothes. Lena smiled, but her thoughts drifted again. Do you think he'll come back? She asked. Her grandmother shrugged gently. Maybe, but even if he doesn't, you already did something great. You saved a life. That's something no one can take away from you. The day went by quietly. Lena helped wash the dishes and swept the yard. By afternoon, the heat returned, and she sat under the shade of a mango tree sketching shapes in the dirt with a stick. She didn't have toys or books, but she always found ways to keep her imagination alive. She didn't notice the sound of a car approaching until it stopped near their gate. When she looked up, her heart skipped. It was the same black car. She stood up quickly, brushing the dust off her clothes. Her grandmother came out of the house, surprised. The man stepped out wearing a light shirt and carrying a paper bag. His driver stayed near the car. holding an umbrella to block the sun. The man smiled as he walked toward them. "I hope I'm not disturbing you," he said kindly. Her grandmother shook her head. "Not at all, sir." "Please come in." The man looked around as he entered the small house. The walls were clean but cracked, and the furniture was old. He noticed the pots carefully stacked in one corner and a few books piled on a wooden stool. It was clear that everything in that house had been used and repaired many times, yet it still carried warmth. Lena stood near the door, shy but smiling. "You came back," she said softly. He nodded. "I told you I would. I wanted to thank you properly this time." He placed the paper bag on the table. Inside were some fresh groceries, rice, milk, sugar, and bread. Her grandmother's eyes widened in surprise. "You didn't have to do this," she said gently. The man smiled. "It's the least I can do after what your granddaughter did for me." He turned to Lena. "You were very brave. You didn't think of yourself even when the river could have taken you away." Lena looked down, twisting her fingers. "I was scared," she admitted. "But I just thought if I didn't help, no one would." Her words hit him deeply. He had spent his whole life around people who only helped when they could gain something in return. Yet this little girl, and who had nothing, had given everything she had without hesitation. He asked her grandmother if he could sit for a while, and she nodded, bringing him a chair. They talked for a long time. He learned that Lena's parents had passed away when she was very young. Her grandmother, though old and sickly, had worked hard to raise her. Their only source of income was the small fruit stall near the market. Sometimes when business was slow, they had to skip meals. But despite that, Lena still went to school whenever she could. She walked long distances barefoot and studied by the dim light of a small kerosene lamp. As the man listened, he felt a strange heaviness in his chest. He was a man who had everything: money, property, cars. But he couldn't remember the last time he had done something that made him feel truly alive. This girl, with nothing but courage and kindness, had done more good in one day than he had done in years. After a while, he turned to Lena and asked, "What do you want to be when you grow up?" She hesitated, unsure if she should say it out loud. "I want to be a teacher," she said finally. "I like helping people learn. My grandmother always says education can change everything." The man smiled. "She's right." Her grandmother chuckled softly. "But books cost money, and money is something we don't see much of," she said, trying to sound lighthearted. The man didn't say anything right away. He just looked at Lena, her bright eyes, her rough hands, her quiet strength, and knew he couldn't walk away from this. After a few minutes, he stood up. "I'll visit again," he said. "There's something I want to arrange for you, but I need a little time." Lena tilted her head. "For me?" he smiled. "Yes, for you." When he left, her grandmother turned to her, still amazed. "Do you see, my dear? You never know how far one act of kindness can go." That evening, as the sun set behind the hills, Lena sat outside watching the sky turn orange. She didn't know what the man meant, but something in his voice told her he was sincere. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you, not just to him, but to life itself." Meanwhile, the man drove back to his large home at the edge of the city. The moment he entered, everything felt different. The grand chandelier, the marble floors, the silence, and it all seemed empty now. He walked into his study and looked out the window. He thought about the day his car had gone off the bridge. If that girl hadn't been there, he would have been gone. He remembered her face when he saw her in the police station, scared, wet, and trembling, yet full of innocence. He thought about how quick people were to judge her, including himself at first. He felt ashamed. That night he couldn't sleep. He kept thinking about the cracked walls of her house, the way her grandmother smiled despite her struggles, and the little girl's quiet dream of becoming a teacher. The next morning he made a few phone calls. He contacted a local builder, a lawyer, and a school principal he knew well. He didn't tell them everything, only that he wanted to help someone who truly deserved it. 3 days later, he returned to Lena's neighborhood. This time, he wasn't alone. A few workers came with him, carrying tools and supplies. The neighbors peeked from their windows, curious. When Lena saw the car again, she ran outside, her heart racing. "Sir," she said, almost breathless. "You came back." He smiled warmly. "I told you I would." Her grandmother came out, confused by the workers behind him. "What's all this?" she asked. The man took off his hat and said, "Ma'am, your granddaughter saved my life." I want to do something for both of you. Please don't refuse." Before they could respond, he signaled to the workers, who began measuring the small house. He explained that he had arranged for their home to be repaired: a new roof, stronger walls, and proper flooring. He also handed her grandmother an envelope with some money to help with their daily needs. Her grandmother's eyes filled with tears. "We can't accept all this," she whispered. But he shook his head. "Please, it's not charity. It's gratitude. I owe her more than I can ever repay." Lena stood still, speechless. She couldn't believe what was happening. For the first time in her life, she saw people working on her house not because it was broken, but because someone cared enough to fix it. That night, she couldn't sleep again, but this time, it was because she was too happy. She kept replaying his words in her mind, the warmth in his voice, the kindness in his eyes. For the first time, the world didn't feel so unfair. Far away, the man sat at his desk, writing a note. He had already decided what to do next. He wasn't just going to fix their house when he would make sure Lena went to school without worrying about money again. He sealed the letter, smiled to himself, and whispered, "She saved my life. Now it's my turn to save hers." What he didn't know was that the next time he visited, his words would make the little girl cry, not out of sadness, but out of the purest joy she had ever felt. The next morning, the air outside was quiet and calm. The storm that had caused so much trouble had finally passed. The sun peeked through the clouds, painting the streets with a soft golden light. But inside the small house at the edge of town, the mood was heavy. The old woman sat near the window, her hands folded tightly together, staring out toward the road. She hadn't slept properly in 2 nights. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw her granddaughter's scared face at the police station. Lena sat beside her, silent. She had been cleared of the accusation, but the words still echoed in her mind. Thief. It was such a sharp word, one that could cut deeper than a knife. Even though the truth had come out, the whispers in the neighborhood hadn't stopped. Some still looked at her with doubt in their eyes. Others avoided her altogether, pretending not to see her when she passed by. Her grandmother placed a gentle hand on her arm. "Don't worry, child," she whispered. "People will forget in time." But Lena wasn't so sure. The world had shown her how quickly it could turn cruel. She wanted to believe that doing the right thing still mattered. But it was hard to feel that way when even kindness had brought her pain. Just then, there was a knock at the door. Her grandmother stood up slowly, thinking it might be a neighbor or maybe the fruit supplier. But when she opened the door, she froze. Standing there was the man Lena had saved. The millionaire everyone had been talking about. He looked different now, dressed simply without the air of wealth or importance that usually surrounded people like him. Lena's eyes widened. She hadn't expected to see him again. She stood up, uncertain if she should hide or come forward. The man gave a small, humble smile. "Good morning," he said softly. "I hope I'm not intruding." Her grandmother stepped aside, still speechless, and gestured for him to come in. The house was small, too small for someone like him, yet he didn't seem uncomfortable. He looked around quietly, his eyes taking in the cracked walls, the sagging roof, and the tiny table that served as both a place for meals and work. He turned to Lena. "You're Lena, right?" She nodded shyly, her voice barely a whisper. "Yes, sir." He smiled again, but this time his expression carried something deeper, gratitude mixed with guilt. "I wanted to see you. I heard what happened after the accident. I can't imagine how scared you must have been." Lena looked down. "They said I took your watch," she murmured. "I know," he said gently. "And I'm so sorry for that. You shouldn't have gone through any of it. When I found out, I couldn't stop thinking about how unfair it was." Her grandmother placed a small cup of tea in front of him, though her hands trembled slightly. "We didn't expect you to come here," she said softly. He nodded. "I had to. I owe this child my life. I thought the least I could do was thank her properly." Lena looked up, confused. "You don't owe me anything. Anyone would have helped." He shook his head slowly. "No, not anyone. There were dozens of people nearby that day. They stood and watched while I was trapped. But you, a 12-year-old girl, jumped into a river without even thinking. That kind of courage is rare." Her grandmother's eyes filled with tears. "She's always been like that," she said quietly. "Too kind for this world." The man leaned forward. "May I ask, what do you want most right now? Anything at all?" Lena hesitated. She'd never been asked a question like that. Her grandmother gave her a small nod, encouraging her to speak her heart. After a moment, she said softly, "I want my grandma to be happy. She works too hard and our roof leaks when it rains. If I could fix that, maybe she wouldn't get sick again." The man looked around once more. He saw the patch of old fabric covering the hole in the ceiling. He saw the worn furniture, the faded curtains, the tired faces. Something tightened inside his chest. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he finished his tea in silence, lost in thought. Then he stood up. "Lena," he said gently, "you've given me something more valuable than all the money I have. You reminded me what matters most. Let me do something for you. Not out of pity, but out of respect." Lena blinked in surprise. "Respect?" He nodded. "Yes, because you didn't see me as a rich man or a stranger. You just saw someone who needed help. That's something I'll never forget." Her grandmother tried to protest. "Sir, we can't accept it," but he stopped her with a kind smile. "Please, this isn't charity. It's gratitude." He promised to return soon, and then he left quietly, leaving behind a silence that felt heavier than before. Neither Lena nor her grandmother knew what to think. They didn't believe promises easily. Life had taught them not to. Days passed. Nothing happened at first. People continued with their routines, and Lena tried to focus on school. Still, every time she crossed the bridge where she'd pulled the man out, her heart beat faster. The memory was sharp. The sound of rushing water, the fear, the cold. She still had a small scar on her arm from that day, a reminder of what she had done. Then one morning, a group of workers appeared near their street. Big trucks rolled in carrying materials. The neighbors gathered around, curious. No one had ever seen construction in their part of town before. Lena watched from the gate, unsure what was going on. One of the workers approached her with a polite smile. "Is this your house?" he asked. She nodded, confused. "Well," the man said, glancing at his clipboard, "we've been sent to repair the roof and make some improvements. The order came from Mr. Hayes." It took her a moment to realize who he meant, the man she had saved. Her eyes widened. "But we didn't ask for this," he smiled. "You don't need to. It's all taken care of." Lena ran inside to tell her grandmother, who could hardly believe it. For the first time in years, their little home echoed with laughter. Over the next few days, the house transformed. The roof was fixed, the walls were painted, and the floors were redone. Even their old window, which used to rattle in the wind, was replaced with a new one that shone when the sunlight hit it. Neighbors stopped by, amazed. "Looks like you're lucky after all," one of them said. Some even apologized for the way they'd treated Lena before. Slowly, the whispers faded away. A week later, the millionaire returned, this time dressed simply again. When he saw the repaired house, he smiled. "It's beautiful," he said. Lena's grandmother thanked him again and again, tears in her eyes. But he only shook his head. "Don't thank me. You both deserve this." Then he turned to Lena. "How's school?" She smiled shyly. "It's okay, but sometimes it's hard to keep up. I miss classes when Grandma's not well." He nodded thoughtfully. "Would you like to study somewhere where you don't have to worry about missing school? Somewhere that helps you become whatever you dream to be?" Her eyes widened. "You mean, like a new school?" "Yes," he said. "I've already spoken to one. They'll take you in with a scholarship. You can focus on learning, and I'll make sure your grandmother is cared for." Lena was speechless. She had never imagined such a thing could happen to her. The man continued, "When I was your age, I lost everything. Someone helped me, and that changed my life. I see that same spark in you. The courage to help others even when you have nothing. Don't lose that." Tears welled up in Lena's eyes. She whispered, "Thank you, sir." He smiled softly. "No, Lena, thank you." Before leaving, he handed her a small package wrapped neatly in brown paper. When she opened it, she found a new wristwatch, simple, elegant, and engraved with tiny words inside. "Time is precious. You saved mine." Lena held it close. Unable to stop her tears, that night as she lay in bed, she looked around their newly repaired home. The rain outside no longer leaked through the ceiling. Her grandmother slept peacefully for the first time in months. And Lena, clutching the watch, whispered a quiet promise to herself that one day she would help someone the same way she had been helped. The world had tried to break her spirit, but kindness had rebuilt it stronger than before. And though she didn't know it yet, this was only the beginning of her new story, one where she wasn't just the poor girl from the neighborhood anymore, but the girl who reminded everyone that doing good always finds its way back. The morning sunlight poured into Lena's small room, shining on the newly painted walls and clean floor. She blinked a few times, taking in the changes around her. The house that had once leaked and cracked now felt warm and safe. Her grandmother was already awake, tending to the small garden that had been planted in front of the house. The two of them had spent the previous night talking and laughing about memories, something they hadn't done in a long time without worry pressing on their minds. Lena dressed carefully in the uniform of the new school she had been enrolled in. She couldn't stop glancing at the new watch on her wrist, its engraved words catching the sunlight. "Time is precious. You saved mine." The words made her chest tighten. Every time she looked at it, she remembered that cold river, the fear in the man's eyes and the feeling of pulling him to safety. She had never felt so small and strong at the same time. Her grandmother came into the room carrying a small basket of fruit. "You ready for your first day at the new school?" she asked softly. Lena nodded, though she felt a little nervous. It wasn't just any school. It was a place full of students from families with resources she had never imagined having. She worried about fitting in, about how they would look at her clothes, her accent, or her simple way of speaking. But her grandmother squeezed her hand gently. "You saved someone's life, child. Don't let anyone make you feel small. Be proud of who you are." With a deep breath, Lena picked up her bag and followed her grandmother to the gate. The man who had changed their lives was waiting in his car as he had promised. He smiled warmly when he saw her, waving gently. "Good morning, Lena," he said. "Good morning, sir," she replied quietly. As they drove through the city, Lena looked out the window. Tall buildings, shiny cars, and people moving quickly through the streets made her feel small at first. But the man beside her didn't talk about money or power, or anything that usually came with being wealthy. Instead, he asked her about school, her dreams, and what she liked to do in her free time. His curiosity was genuine, and it made her relax a little. By the time they arrived at the school, Lena felt a mixture of excitement and fear. The building was large, filled with bright classrooms, colorful posters, and students who all seemed older and more confident than she felt. She clutched her bag tightly, glancing at the man beside her. He knelt down to her level and said softly, "Lena, remember, you belong here as much as anyone. Don't let the size of the building or the number of students scare you. You are brave and you are capable." She nodded and smiled nervously. "I'll try, sir." He smiled back, then handed her to the principal of the school. "This is Lena," he said. "She deserves a chance to shine." The principal welcomed her warmly, showing her to her classroom. Lena walked in, trying to appear confident even though her heart raced. The other students stared at her at first, whispering among themselves. Some were curious, some doubtful, but Lena reminded herself of what the man had said. "You are brave and you are capable." The day passed slowly, but Lena did her best. She answered questions, wrote carefully in her notebook, and tried to make friends. Some students were kind, some were indifferent, and some teased her quietly, but Lena didn't let it hurt her. Every time she felt nervous, she remembered the river, the fear, and how she had saved a life without hesitation. That gave her courage. Meanwhile, the man kept his promise to her grandmother. He arranged for her medical care and provided enough for their daily needs. The little house remained safe and warm, with the garden growing steadily under her grandmother's care. A week later, the man returned to check on Lena. She had already begun adjusting to school, though she sometimes felt tired from the new routine. He brought a small gift, a notebook, some pencils, and a book about courage and kindness. "I thought this might help you," he said, handing them to her. Lena held the items close, speechless. "Thank you, sir," she whispered. He looked at her gently. "You've already taught me something important, Lena. You reminded me that courage doesn't always come from being strong or rich. Sometimes it comes from being small and caring deeply. I will never forget that." For Lena, the words hit harder than any gift. She felt tears prick her eyes, but this time they weren't from fear or sadness. They were from gratitude and the quiet realization that someone believed in her when almost everyone else had doubted her. As the weeks went by, Lena began to flourish. She learned quickly and gained confidence. She no longer felt ashamed of her past or where she came from. She realized that courage and kindness could change the world even if only a little. And the man who had once been a stranger became someone she looked up to, not just for what he could provide, but for the way he treated her with respect and dignity.